point, I have to actually agree. I agree with Commissioner O'Brien's logic. I would just more, having watched this property for a number of years, so emotionally, I'd rather make them pay now something, but rationally, I think your reasoning is good, so I'll support your motion.
Fantastic. Are there any other, anybody from the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, we do have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right, the next item is consideration of Affordable Housing Advisory Committee recommendations. Welcome.
Phil Mattson, Community Development Director, and let me introduce Bill Shute of the Long Range Planning Section. And this is the culmination of a lot of thought, a lot of effort, and a lot of good works by a lot of good people in the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. So, Bill, go ahead and present everything.
All right, thank you. And as mentioned, I'm Bill Shute, Chief of Long Range Planning for Indian River County. And one of my roles is to work with housing issues. And as Phil mentioned, there's a lot of work that went into this overall. Recommendations, 15 recommendations before you today. And it's really grounded in a lot of financial analysis and understanding incomes of people, their residents, and the ability to pay for housing. We look at developers' costs, and we look at pro formas for development, and what does it cost to build single-family housing? What does it cost to build multifamily housing? We look at site development costs for just an individual new home, and if someone wanted to pull a building permit and build their own home with a local builder, what would the cost be involved? Is that feasible? And to who? What income groups? We look at options for reducing costs through smaller homes and how much the solution that is. We look at different codes, fire and building codes. We looked at financing mechanisms through federal and state. We had separate reports on that. We looked at lot sizes, accessory dwellings, number of units, and as a means to reduce costs. So extensive amount of work. It's not really represented in the staff agenda item because it's many reports over 6 different meetings with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. So the purpose, going through the slideshow presentation, December 2018, the Board of County Commissioners requested that AHAC, Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, discuss, study, and review the affordable housing issue within the county and develop new recommendations to encourage development of new affordable housing. And as mentioned, they met 6 times and extensively reviewed the issue, and 15 recommendations came from that. Now, just stepping back and looking at some income classification data, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee looked at the annual income starting with the minimum wage job at 40 hours per week, and that's calculated to be about $17,597. And we went up to about 70,000, which is near the cap of the moderate income classification. So in the center, you'll see just different income classifications. These are common terms used in statute. They're used in the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the federal agency. They're used in our Florida Housing Finance Corporation. We use them locally in our SHIP program. You deal with extremely low income, very low income, and moderate income households. And the third column is just looking at 2019 data. If we were going to look at all, it's based on household size. This is a household size of 3, just to give a representation. The average household size is roughly 2.5 people per household in the county right now. So we just threw in, rounded up and said 3, just to give you a representation. And you can see up to $21,330 for the extremely low income, between $21,000 and just under $30,000 for very low income, and $29,000 to $46,000 for low income, and $46,000 to $70,000 for moderate income. And to the far right, there's projections that have been included. These are based on census data, our annual growth rate for the county. It's also compared to some outside agency calculations that are in different reports that are available. And just looking at the totals, you can see 2,130 households and extremely low are projected new households by 2030. And you have very low, another projected 1,225, and another 1,598 for low income. Now, what the AHAC also looked at was what's the ability to pay for housing if they had a housing payment, and we did this through different spreadsheets looking at, again, looking at their income. We followed some standard rules, the 28-36 rule, which is 28% towards housing is your maximum that you should be spending, and 36% to your total debt. And we did the calculations, and you can see the center column, $62 would be available for the a person or individual earning minimum wage for housing. You know, you start going down to $45,000, you have $656, all the way up to $75,000, you have $1,550. Ran some more calculations, different spreadsheets. We started looking at mortgages and saying, you know, understanding the $62 example for the minimum wage, you also have to pay money for insurance and taxes, and that's kind of how you end up with a negative number there in that case. But you can see around 60,000, we have some green there and some yellow. Those are highlighted because those are about the points where you can start to afford a new single-family home that's being built in the community, or also the rental, market rate and rental options. So corresponding to that, here's one of the tables from one of the single-family reports. And we did a review, you know, internet search, looking at single-family houses, what's the newest ones being built, and what's the lowest priced. And we found them in Bear Lake Estates by Wade Journey. And this is back in September 2019. It was roughly $180,000 was the cheapest. And to the right, you can see the approximate minimum annual income need of $61,000 to afford that home. With respect to rental rates, to support new and future apartments in Indian River County, we were lucky in that, you know, we have so many sunshine laws here that a lot of data is available. So we found 3 projects that are proposed in the county currently for one called Indian River Homes, one called Blue Harbor, and one called Sebastian's Landing. And these projects are part of the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is a federal program administered by the state. And it's a big funding source to help meet the needs for very low, extremely low, and low income housing needs in the community. So they have to publish all their data and really want to focus on the total per unit costs for each of those at the bottom there. We have $231,000 total per unit cost for Indian River Homes development. Blue Harbor is $233,000. Sebastian Landing is $179,000. So you're looking at really costs, if you remember from the earlier slide, they're exceeding the cost of a single family home that might be built in Bear Lake Estates. We took those numbers and we broke down, understanding that developers of apartment complexes need profit, and they got to pay for costs for insurance. They have to pay for, you know, maintenance costs of these units. We came up with at the very bottom a total per unit rental rate potential based on various assumptions. But you're starting to look at the rental rates of near $1,700 for Indian River Homes, Blue Harbor $1,673, and Sebastian Landing is just over $1,300 per month. And these are assuming a 5% rate, which they list in their application, but it's also assuming no low-income housing tax credits. So the purpose of the exercise was to say, hey, if a developer wants to build market rate housing without all these subsidies, low-income housing tax credits in this case, this is roughly the amount they would have to charge to make ends meet. Now, in terms of painting a picture of who we're talking about earning less than $60,000, we've got 3 different slides. There's 200 something. Okay, I pulled this data from Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. They published data on income by occupation. And there's over 200, near 300 different occupations. I got 3 slides to show you just to highlight a few. You can see different types of jobs and people in the community that are earning under $60,000. You have automotive body and related repairs, just it's very low income for a mean annual salary of $40,000, entry annual salary of $24,000, so that's a very low income. Aircraft mechanics and service technicians, low income. Waiters and waitresses, you got very low and extremely low income. Hotels, motel, resort desk clerks, very low income, $23,000, $21,000 there. Childcare workers, you're dealing with extremely low income and very low income, between $19,000 and $23,000. Bus drivers for schools, $36,000 is the mean annual salary. Entry annual salary is very low income at $30,000. We've got middle school teachers, which is in the moderate income, but still under $60,000 for a mean annual salary of $58,000. Entry annual salaries in the low income category of $45,000. Firefighters are just under $40,000 in low income and $32,000 for the entry annual. Police and sheriff's patrol offers $54,000 for the mean annual and $43,000 for the entry annual. Yep, nursing assistants, you can see registered nurses, secretaries, you know, all under. Some key findings from the analysis. No new single-family home or townhome purchase options exist for households with annual incomes below $65,000. We have no market rate rental apartment complex options for households earning less than 55,000, I rounded up there. Unsubsidized apartment complex rent costs are truly market rate and address moderate income households and above, both for home ownership and rental. You know, new projects cannot address extremely low, very low, or low income households unless they're subsidized through other sources. Market rate could be a partial solution supplying workforce housing. And in statute, they talk about workforce housing as household income does not exceed 140% of the area median income. So when you hear that term, that's what they're talking about. So jumping into the recommendations, you know, there was much more, you know, we probably could have had 150 slides explaining a lot of all this, but jumping into the recommendations, recommendation number one is to set affordable housing targets and achieve them. 5-year, by 2025, countywide target of 1,500 additional affordable housing units, produced, secured, or provided through assistance by private sector and public sector efforts. By 2030, the target's 4,000. Recommendation number two, revise the expedited permitting. So revise expedited permitting process with new forms and follow-up. This has already been completed by staff. We have a new form. It's neon fluorescent green, and we internally coordinate when we have these. Recommendation number three, allow very small lot subdivisions. Develop regulations that would allow for smaller, perhaps 36-foot wide lots with smaller homes. And we had examples presented at the AHAC of these types of developments. However, we would want to look and make sure that this is a good fit for Indian River County, and make sure that you can address drainage, AC unit location, noise, roof overhangs, things like that. Recommendation number four, remove, limit small lot market rate housing options and increase incentives for small lot affordable development. So we have under the plan development regulations and plat over site plan regulations, two mechanisms already that developers are allowed to come in and make small lots for affordable housing as well as market rate. And, you know, the issue is to reevaluate that and see if any revisions are needed. Recommendation number five, tiny and modular home promotion. So another suggestion is to develop informational packets for tiny homes. We looked at the tiny home issue, and it potentially could help some, perhaps the 45,000, 55,000 range for annual income. But then you also have a real tiny home, and how feasible is it to live in that? That's another question. But you know, the recommendation is to make these packets available to let people know that you can do these in the community, in the county. Recommendation number six, increase accessory dwelling size. Update accessory dwelling regulations to increase the square footage cap from 33% to 50% of heated, cooled gross floor area of principal home, and also to keep a 750 square foot under air accessory dwelling cap except for lots that are greater than 1 acre and have a home that's at least 2,500 square foot or larger. The suggestion is to go up to 1,000 square foot in those cases. Recommendation number seven, reduce impact fees. So this has already been presented back in January to the board as a concept, and doing a $0 impact fee for very low and low income single family housing of less than 1,000 square foot, and then 50% of reduced impact fee rate for very low and low income single family housing between 1,000 and 1,500 square foot. Now this is part of the impact fee study update again that the board has reviewed, and it's scheduled. Overall, the impact fee study was in the proposed ordinance is scheduled for March 10th, just so that's on your agenda. Recommendation number 8, former Gifford Garden site. So the board has seen this come before you already, and you've discussed some of these issues. Acquiring through foreclosure or purchase. The board was in support of that, and soliciting proposals from housing organizations to develop site with owner-occupied or mix of owner-occupied and rental housing. So the board had reviewed, as mentioned, and directed the attorney's office to coordinate with the owner to purchase at a justifiable price, or if unsuccessful in 3 months, to pursue foreclosure. So since that authorization for the county attorney to proceed, the county attorney's office has negotiated a purchase price of $10,000 for that 3.33 acre site. So it's part of the recommendation today for the board to approve and authorize the chair to execute any documents necessary to effectuate the sale. Recommendation number 9 is really to meet regularly to review progress and challenges for the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Recommendation number 10, community education for issues affecting ability to obtain housing. So work with partners such as nonprofits or businesses to provide support to communities in need of credit repair, mortgage process education, probate process educations, and other activities. So with that one, you look at housing, but you have to look at everybody's budgets and how they manage money. So that's intended to help that end of the, or that area. Recommendation number 11, number 12, and number 14. So we're going to jump into those, but just a quick note, staff time analysis with presentations are recommended for those, and they both involve, or they all involve increasing and decreasing property rights, which would need legal considerations and further discussion. Recommendation number 11 is limit uses allowed in multifamily zoning districts. Staff to review its current multifamily zoning regulations and identify opportunities to limit allowed uses in those zoning districts, to reserve multifamily zoning, or zoned areas primarily for multifamily housing, and provide a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. And some of this comes out of the fact that we looked at the total acreage of multifamily housing and how it's actually being used for other activities and not just multifamily housing, including small lot, single-family development, and other uses. Recommendation number 12, increase county affordable housing density bonus. The recommendation from the AHAC is that the board directs staff to revise the affordable housing density bonus allowances from 20 to 50% in multifamily zoning districts, and to request that the municipalities do something similar. So right now, under our planned development regulations, we do allow a 20% density bonus for affordable housing. So the AHAC did look at different scenarios and different calculations and how much that would increase all hypotheticals. I want to say we have roughly 1,300 acres of multifamily zone property, and those are acres that are at least 2 acres or more on parcels. So they started looking at that issue. But of course, anytime you increase density, we'd have to look at how does that impact neighboring uses, and you'd have to wrap in different analysis into that recommendation as well. Recommendation number 13, request municipalities to revise regulations. So that really kind of goes back to number 12. And on the AHAC, you have representatives from each municipality in the county. So, and they're aware of all the work that has been done. So the recommendation is for them to also look at their rules and see what they can do. Recommendation number 14 is study need for additional multifamily zoning. So this kind of goes back to earlier comments. Whether additional multifamily zoning is needed to increase supply, and study where specifically that zoning should be placed and at what density. And then bring the item back to the AHAC and then back to the board. Recommendation number 15. Now this goes back to the funding issue. So this was discussed quite extensively. We have the SHIP program, State Housing Initiative Partnership. There's annual allocations from the state each year, and if we actually got our allocations that we're supposed to get, we'd get close to $2 million per year. Past few years, we've been getting $350,000 for that program, and that's to rehab existing and single-family homes in order to preserve them for affordable housing. That's one of the main roles that the county has pursued with the SHIP. But over the course of the program, starting back in the early 90s, the state has went ahead and reallocated $2 billion, over $2 billion for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to other state priorities. And so, the request for the AHAC is really for the BCC and city town councils to get into the advocacy. And I know that has been happening some, but, if there's opportunities beyond what has been done, that's what the AHAC's looking at. With respect to the low-income housing tax credit program, that program is really there to support private developers to support building apartment complexes. And since 2002, 2003 timeframe, that's the last time we had an affordable housing apartment complex built in the county. And a lot of that goes back to the limited funds through that program, through low-income housing tax credit program. It also goes back to the scoring methods. So maybe there's an opportunity to advocate for alternative scoring methods to reallocate those funds in different ways to communities that have not received the funds. So the recommendation, staff recommends that the Board of County Commissioners review and consider the list of Affordable Housing Advisory Committee recommendations, discuss any proposed changes the board would like, and approve the list of for implementation as it may be modified by the Board of the County Commissioners. And then specifically to the Gifford Gardens, former Gifford Gardens project site, staff recommends that the Board of County Commissioners approve the negotiated price of $10,000 for that property acquisition and authorize the chair to execute any documents necessary to effectuate the sale.
Thank you. And I just want to give kudos to staff and to the Affordable Housing Committee for all the hard work that you guys put into coming up with these recommendations. It's a great list of recommendations, and I look forward to my other commissioners' comments. Commissioner Solari?
Got a couple, not surprised. First, I want to congratulate Bill Shute. I mean, his agenda items were incredible. He clearly did an incredible amount of work, so thank you. I also want to try to put this in a little bit of perspective. This is just a start. I mean, even what we do today and even what the Affordable Housing Committee does in the future, few months, this has got to be considered no more than a start. This is got to be a continuing, ongoing process at this point. And we may even make some mistakes here, but it's much better to make some mistakes than not to do anything at all. And I want to point out, for some people who might not think that affordable housing is a good thing or important thing, that a substantial reason why the price of housing in our community is so high is because of government rules and regulations. So when we make changes today, it's not any gift of government to anybody. It's just trying to change rules and regulations so that the other half of America can actually live in Indian River County. And from Bill's information there, it's quite clear. Half of Americans can no longer afford to live anywhere in Indian River County. That wasn't the case when I got here in 1980, when basically almost any American could live somewhere in Indian River County. But today it is the case. And that slide that was put up earlier about the cost of new homes in the city of Vero Beach is indicative of that. You know, the price of new homes being built in the city of Vero Beach is now somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million. So in 1980, the city of Vero Beach was affordable to some. By the time I became involved in politics 15 years ago, I was told by policemen in the city of Vero Beach, now we can no longer afford to live in the city of Vero Beach. Some of us go up to Sebastian. Sebastian is almost no longer affordable for starting police, fire, teachers. And again, that's not the type of community we want to live in. So, I mean, I would be very happy to make a motion to do all of these right now. But as Bill pointed out, there's some of them that I believe we need to have reviewed by the county attorney just to make sure there aren't any problems with them, like you mentioned 11 and 12, recommendations 11 and 12. Could you by any chance separate the ones that you think need to be looked at a little further from the others?
So, yeah, I would say 11, 12, and 14.
So, yeah, and most of the others seem pretty clear. So for starters, I'd be happy to make a motion that we authorize all except 11, 12, and 14 to go through right now. And perhaps for 11, 12, and 14, ask staff to look at them more carefully with help from the county attorney to make sure that we're not doing anything else. And I will note that item number 1 is really got to be considered probably more aspirational. I mean, in the best case scenario, if we make a meaningful progress towards those goals, I think would be successful. But I don't want to leave anybody with the opinion that we're going to be so good at this one issue that we'll be able to accomplish and do things that no other community in America has managed to do in the last 30 years. So
that is
a motion.
a two-part motion?
Yes.
I'll be happy to second that.
Thank you.
Other comments, Commissioner Zork?
Yes, a couple questions, Bill. Under item number 3, the 36-foot lot width, was there a recommended lot depth with those?
There was no specific, we did look at an example, and
Okay.
I'm not recalling that exact depth. So
'Cause I know
I
in some
actual
of the-
plat from another community,
Okay.
which we could pull.
All right, well, I'd rather leave it flexible to what worked for the product that somebody might put on it. And then under 7, I don't know if it came up during the meeting, that when we go through these efforts to reduce the cost of housing from something that would be purchased or built by someone, I know Habitat has that great document that they put with all their transaction. I think it's called a shared equity participation. I may be wrong on the name, where it keeps somebody from flipping the house and cashing in on all the hard work done by the community to reduce the cost of housing. So that would be a suggestion if a document like that could go at number 7. And then number 11, the 1,300 acres, maybe at some point you could share with me a map that comes up with that, because I did just a quick search looking at, okay, out of that 1,300 acres, on what's for sale in the market today that's over 2 acres, and it's 3 to 5. And I say 3 to 5 because a couple of them are sketchy. So there may be 1,300 acres, depending on where it's at, what's its proximity to utilities, paved road, some of those things. But there's not much on the market in your larger ones to really get more cost effective, because pretty much every project has to have a lift station. Okay, there's a $100,000 expense for your project. If you happen to have a piece of property that fronts a canal crossing, that's another $50,000 to $60,000. So you're at 160 and you haven't done one thing yet for your site. So depending on where some of those acreages are at, some will be more desirable than others. But if there's 1,300, people are keeping it. There's not much on the market for sale. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, other comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On some of the smaller lot stuff and the tiny homes, I just be advised that there'll probably be a lot of NIMBY on those kind of things. There is a tiny home over in the Vero Beach Country Club neighborhood area, and when that was first built, I got calls on it, people asking, well, is this allowed? This is going to ruin our property values, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then when if y'all remember a month or so ago, the source was before us, and they had a plan for tiny homes for veterans, and one potential site was right on Oslo. And my phone lit up with everybody from Falcon Trace and Millstone Landing, worried about how that would impact their property values, and they're well over a mile away. So I'd just be cautious when you start looking at where these things go, that there will be a lot of NIMBYism on that. 36-foot wide lots, again, with Millstone and Falcon, you get a lot of complaints from neighbors about air conditioning units, pool heaters, because they're so close. And if that thing's located right by the bedroom window, it creates an instant conflict among neighbors. And I really think instead of doing that, maybe look at just more multifamily would make more sense. Just real tiny lots and real narrow setbacks, I just don't think are neighborly compatible. I think some of the bonus density is reasonable, and we should look at that. And then, as Commissioner Zork mentioned, there's got to be deed restrictions and stuff to make sure that what our intention is carried out. And again, like Falcon Trace, we changed that to make smaller lots with the idea the homes would be more affordable. And then the builders just went 2 stories and built $400,000 homes. So whatever we do, we need to make sure there's not a way to game it to build a bigger home just because we're reducing the costs, and that would translate to a higher profit margin on some of the builders by taking advantage of any loopholes. So just make sure we are really tight with what we do there. And I think that's it for now, Madam Chair. I'll support Commissioner Solari's motion. I think we should start looking at these things. Not sure if all of them will be easily implemented, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Anybody from the public wishing to speak on this? Please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen Zurich, 945 37th Avenue, Vero Beach. I would just like to say a couple of things, that, okay, affordable housing is something that is desperately needed to be looked at. And one thing about the listings of income in these reports. Now, looking at some of those figures that were on the screen, now, one thing that I think needs to be considered is many of those jobs are considered full-time, but in many of your service areas, particularly things like retail, companies are only hiring part-time. And you've got many people out there who are making maybe half of what the amount was shown on the screens there. And I would hope that this commission and others, other boards, agencies, bodies of influence would consider having smaller units, smaller homes, making affordable for people of even of that level of income. And I should also consider it's not just regulations that hamper, but also it is speculation and, well, speculation, just investing in property that increases in value, but why? Why does it increase, especially if it is nothing built upon it? I have seen in the past in other places, someone's building an apartment story with a penthouse, and before it's even constructed, they sell it for half again its value, and it goes up like this. There needs to be control of that too. And as far as the comment by Commissioner O'Brien about NIMBYism, people are saying, not in my backyard. I've got news for you. They're already in your backyard. The homeless are already there, or else in the woods adjacent to it. They need to be helped, and they should be helped. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else from the public?
Julianne Price, Chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. I think we've heard today that affordable housing is a top issue in our county, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done over the past year. I support all of the recommendations today. I want to recognize many of the AHAC members are in our audience today, as well as new partners such as the Johns Island Affordable Housing Task Force and members that we work with, like Louise Hubbard for many years. And lastly, Bill Shute, staff who have supported this process and made all this information and progress possible, and champions like Commissioner Solari and Commissioner Zork also, who has presented at our meetings. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Yes, ma'am, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Ellen Kendall, and I live at 650 Beach Road in Vero Beach. And I'm also the chair of the Johns Island Affordable Housing Task Force. And many of the members of my task force are here, as well as a number of Johns Island community members who are very interested in this topic. Many of our task force members have been attending the Indian River County Affordable Housing Advisory Committee over the last year. And I also want to salute the members of that committee who've done an incredible job pulling together the information. Bill Shute in particular, we've had a chance to review all of his data and information and hear the conversation and discussion about the legislative proposals being made today. And we're very much in support of these recommendations. We also feel strongly that this is just a start. And as Commissioner Solari pointed out, we have a long way to go to catch up this county to where it needs to be to address the affordable housing issue. I think the Givert Gardens project is an admirable one, but it's a small one. And if you agree to a goal of 1,500 units in the next 5 years and 4,000 units in the next 10 years, the community will need to go bigger and bolder in order to meet that target, and at least not just have an aspiration, but actually have a commitment to meeting that target. And I know that we will run into a lot of NIMBYism in this community, just like every other community in the country that's facing this issue and that is so far behind where they need to be. So we will continue to support all of these efforts and hope that the county commissioners will have the political will and fortitude to sort of resist that NIMBYism and come up with some creative solutions to meet your target. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else from the public? If you'd like to speak, please come up to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Morning, Sunny Davenport speaking. In reference to Commissioner O'Brien's idea on 1/3 of an acre as opposed to building a single home on 1/3 of an acre, as Joe mentioned, Commissioner O'Brien mentioned, pool heaters, air conditioning heaters don't make good neighbors. And I think going up as opposed to out is the greatest idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? All right, any other commissioners have comments? Yes, Commissioner Zork.
I have one. When we look at our land use designation, then you look at the uses, you'll see things like permitted, special exception, staff approval. And I don't know how we accomplish this, but if we have a small lot subdivision, a 36-foot or whatever size it happens to be, and if they complete the 10 boxes required for their site, how do we get that to become a permitted use, not a PD, not a special exception that opens that door of somebody else closing the door on us? And I don't know the mechanism to accomplish that, but if we can have more things that if you do these items, we're not doing something intentionally to hurt another property owner or another neighborhood, but we have to come up with the means to have places to have affordable housing somewhere. And by making it a special exception or a PD, when you go a PD application, it's a very expensive process. You basically have to design your entire project, everything up front. And you may get to the end and then somebody comes out and says, no, I don't want that here. What happens to all that money that's spent? It all is completely gone. So I don't know, it's maybe just something to think about of how do we get these items that if they do everything that we want them to do, it's a permitted use versus a special exception or a PD. Now, again, don't know the answer, but it might be interesting to see what can come from that, because that'll help pave the way and may help foster more people to put the capital at risk to go through a process that if they know, if I do these 10 things or we include everything on the county's checklist, this is permitted to be done versus a special exception or a PD approval where the public gets to chime in and can try to deny a project going forward.
Okay, and I think that's something that staff's going to be looking at in conjunction with the county attorney as to how we move some of these issues forward. And correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but you'll be bringing some of these issues back individually because they are going to require ordinance and policy changes. And at that time, we can probably have a more robust discussion on each individual item at that time, is how I would envision it happening.
And then on the number 3, so when you do a plat over site plan, if everything mathematically fits with separation, fire separation, ingress, egress, driveway, sidewalks, and you do a plat over site plan and you're less than 36, that wouldn't be permitted. And I don't know how you would get less than 36 because that's really getting into a good size to reduce it. But plat over site plan is a little bit of a different process that very few people use it because you have to be pretty creative to figure out how to design the project and then throw the plat over the top of it after you've gotten everything to work. So plat over site plan would still have to be at the 36-foot minimum.
Right, if you're asking that's the intent, I think in one of the recommendations we were talking about the issue of you're allowing the plat over site plans now in multifamily zoned areas. So, if we want to use the plat over site plan as the vehicle for this 36-foot wide lot, and that's where we'd want to pull in different staff. Actually, I see John McCoy standing up right now. That's perfect.
Welcome, John.
Good morning. John McCoy with the Current Development Section. And you're correct, Commissioner's work. The plat over the site plans are design specific and they're allowed in the multifamily zoning districts. So you really have to have a product in mind and then design to your product. On a 36-foot wide lot, I don't think that's necessarily I think that's a number people are relatively comfortable with. Conceivably, with the plat over the site plan, you may get smaller, but if you're looking at a 36-foot wide lot, you're probably looking at a 26-foot wide product or a little narrower. And again, the narrow lots do provide some design challenges with some of the equipments and other items, so we need to have that in mind when we're going through that design process as well, how we're going to address some of those factors as well. So, but through the site plan process, it is designed specific for the product.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, just for the record, I did hear that the 36-foot wide lot might suggest some concern and was linked to NIMBYism. Look, I grew up in an apartment building. I didn't have to go very far to get to my neighbor. Just open up the front door. With a 36-foot wide lot and the average home being more than 30 foot wide, I mean, you're only going to have but a few feet on each side. So the suggestion and support of going upward instead of outward is far more appealing. And I have grave reservations about putting a structure that would be equivalent to a double wide on a property where you can simply reach out the window and pass an egg to your neighbor that requested it. I think there should be some buffer zone. It's not about the air conditioning. It's not about the pool heater. I don't know if on a 36-foot wide lot you're going to be able to get a pool heater and an air conditioner that's not mounted up in the attic. But
Can you get a pool on a 36-foot wide lot? I mean, but,
Bathtub.
sorry.
well, they might want to go with the jacuzzi.
Duly
We
noted.
did have one of those incidents here about 2 years ago, about a heated jacuzzi. Such being the case, I would also have grave reservations about a 36-foot wide lot. I think that should be seriously.
Yeah, duly noted, and we don't want to approve anything that's going to create code enforcement issues down the road for us, and I think we want to look at it with some foresight. That having been said, a couple of comments. One, to Commissioner Zork's issue about some hybrid between the negotiated plan development process and what's permitted as opposed to a special exception. We do have administrative permit also in the category, and that's a fairly easier route to negotiate with it. So maybe we can use our administrative permit process, which is working within the constructs of our existing zoning regulations. Second, a lot of the devil's in the details on quality. I'll remind you, Windsor has no setbacks. And, we don't hear code complaints from the Windsor neighbors being too close and so forth. So to the extent that these can be done and can be done in conjunction with incorporating quality into development, duly noted. I think smaller lots do tend to create more problems than larger lots, but I would bring that up. We do have some very successful, Point West and so forth, places that have fairly close proximity, and it's because we attenuate and buffer for it. So, and then finally, everything, even 3 and 4, in addition to 11, 12, 14, they require land development regulation amendments, comprehensive plan amendments, things like that, which is a process that involves public involvement. So we will be taking everything back in turn as we conduct our research and see what we can do quicker, maybe look for the lower hanging fruit that gets this stuff done a little quicker.
Fantastic. The only comment I will make is smaller lots create a problem when you're trying to put something traditional on them. If you're trying to utilize smaller lots to accomplish the goal of affordable housing, you're creating something that's slightly different than a traditional 2-bedroom, 3-bath home with a 1-car garage type of situation. And I think that there's multiple successful examples across the country of places that have even smaller lot subdivisions than the 36-foot that have been quite successful. So I'm sure staff will be reviewing those and working with our partners to ensure that those types of quality subdivisions and regulations are what we're bringing back, and I look forward to the discussion on each of these ordinances and policy changes as they move forward. And again, I just want to thank everybody that's put so much hard work into this. This is really a lot of recommendations with a lot of data, and a lot of research and thought has gone into it, and I think it's a great package. So with that, we do have a motion and a second. There's no further discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. We're going to move on to the Office of Management and Budget, update on online vehicle auction and additional surplus approvals. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. Jennifer Hyde, County Purchasing Manager. Last summer, the board authorized staff to sell titled assets and vehicles online as opposed to live auctions, which has been our practice for the last several years. And we promised to come back with an update on how that went. We were able to sell 35 titled assets successfully, and from the table in the agenda item, you can kind of see the revenue is pretty much in line with what we were experiencing in live auctions, even though it's really hard to compare one to another because the character and quality of the vehicles is going to vary from one to the next. And several of the vehicles that we did sell had been idle for over a year. We realized a lot of benefits, we think, from the online auction. It definitely required less dedicated staff time over consolidated days. We were able to do a few things a couple hours at a time rather than dedicating several people to an extended auction time. We reached a much wider audience with our items. Most of the vehicles that we had over 1,000 hits. People were looking at them at least. And that led to more active bidders. It ended up that still most of our buyers were within the state of Florida. So we're keeping our sales tax in the state, which is, is a good thing. Some anticipated benefits if we continue to use the online auction is that it gives us the ability to sell these while they still have value, and get them off of our parking lots within weeks of when we remove them from service. So our recommendation is that first the board declare the vehicles on the attached list as surplus, and also that the board authorize disposal of all items, including vehicles online, as they are approved surplus by the board. On behalf
New
of
staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you.
Did you get the vote? It's 5. Did I ask opposed? Anybody opposed? Sorry, I got distracted.
No, it's 5-0.
All right, now it's 5-0. Thank you. And we'll move on to the budget workshop hearing schedule.
Good morning, Commissioners. Kristen Daniels, Budget Director. Before you today are the proposed budget workshop and hearing dates for the fiscal year 2020-21 budget. Staff is proposing the budget workshop be held on Wednesday, July 15th, with Thursday, July 16th being reserved in the event that a second day is needed. Budget staff is going to release the budget the Friday before the workshop, which will be Friday, July 10th this year. Staff is proposing the tentative budget hearing be held on Wednesday, September 16th at 5:01, with the final budget hearing being held a week later on Wednesday, September 23rd, also at 5:01 p.m.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. And with that, yes, Solari and O'Brien. And with that, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Thank you, Kristen.
I don't know.
We're going to call this meeting back to order.
Get that clerk back there.
All right. If the clerk is ready. Ready? Okay. We'll move on to utility services, County Road 510 Utility Design Agreement. Welcome, Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. We have before you request to approve the utility design agreement, otherwise known as utility design by FDOT consultant. As mentioned in the backup, we have two major utility lines in the 510 corridor. FDOT is looking to do design for drainage and roadway improvements between the intersection of County Road 512 all the way over to 58th Avenue. Again, 5.22 miles. We have a 12-inch PVC force main along the south side and a 16-inch water main along the north side. Staff initially taught to utilize our our consulting engineers, but as noted in here, the design costs would far exceed the CCNA requirements per Florida statute. We had also looked at going out for requests for qualifications, but that was a 4 to 6 month timeline. In order to meet the very stringent FDOT timeline, we elected to solicit a proposal from Snubs Engineering, who is also doing the design portion of the drainage improvements for the roadway improvements. As noted, staff did look at doing deflections for the existing force main and water main, and we came up with a rough number about $12 million. So you'll see that the cost of construction for the new improvements is very costly, close to $22 million, but we were looking at keeping the lines in place and spending about $12 million just for the multitude of offsets that would have been required for some of the potential drainage improvements. So staff tried to outline some of the reasons why we solicited the proposal from Snubs, who gave us the proposal that's attached to here. And through our legal process in FDOT, we've reached some sort of agreement with respect to the language contained in the attached agreements. Staff is certainly recommending two-part approval. One is for the section of improvements that would be necessary for the design agreement 405606-3 and also 405606-4. In total, those two amounts for just the design portion of about $1.327 million. Keep in mind that staff initially got a proposal from the consultant of about $1.8 million. We negotiated that down to 1.3 and change. We also wanted to point out that this includes a design for reclaimed water, 12-inch force main for reclaimed water to potentially provide services to things like Blue Water Bay, potential area south of 510 on the annexation agreement, and some of the other developments that have gone through some of the review process throughout the county, so that not only would we be replacing our existing water and force main, but also to provide the infrastructure for future reclaimed water to be supplied to these potential developments. So in closing, staff would respectfully request that the Board of County Commissioners approve the utility design agreements as listed in the attached backup, authorize the chairman to execute the agreements after final review and approval by the county's attorney's office, and I'm certainly available for any questions that the board may have.
Move staff recommendation.
I have a motion by Commissioner Solari and a second by Commissioner Flesher. Is there any discussion? Anybody from the public? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to county attorney's matters. Mr. Reingold.
Thank you very much. As the board is aware, in our federal litigation dealing with the United States Department of Transportation and the Virgin Trains project, back in December of 2019, we had received an unfavorable ruling from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. I brought an agenda item to the Board of County Commissioners in January. It was my recommendation that we do not proceed further with regards to the federal litigation. I wanted to be very clear to the board and the audience that my recommendation not to proceed forward was not based upon the idea that we didn't have good arguments or that we didn't have a good record or that I disagreed with our position. I thought we had a very good position. I thought we had excellent arguments. We just didn't prevail. And the likelihood of being picked for jurisdiction by the United States Supreme Court, I believe is very small. And with that, therefore, I recommended that the board not continue moving forward with the federal litigation, and that was the direction chosen by the board. Since that time, I had been approached by private individuals who had basically offered to fund that risk of not getting to go to the United States Supreme Court. Basically, the proposal was they've picked a private law firm that's given them generally a quote to handle a jurisdictional brief. As far as I'm concerned, if the private sector wants to step forward to the table to fund that portion of the litigation, I have no qualms or opposition to having it funded privately and having the county make an attempt to get the United States Supreme Court to hear our case. I think we have merits. I think we have important issues. And therefore, what I'm presenting today is to the board is for the board to actually decide to move forward with seeking a certiorari review by the United States Supreme Court. I will note that that is based upon the private sector being able to raise what has been told to me was a $200,000 number for the filing of the initial briefs to get certiorari review. And that would then, I would authorize request that the board authorize the county staff to then execute an agreement with the law firm that has been identified, which was Paul Weiss. They have extensive appellate history, specifically a gentleman by the name of Canon Shenmungen, who I spoke to, has extensive history in arguing before the Supreme Court, and actually has clerked for Justice Scalia. So, and then what I present to the board today is that if we were to overcome that hurdle and the United States Supreme Court were to decide to take this case, that the county then fund the remaining portion of the appellate costs. I can say that in the conversation I had with Cannon, he had estimated that those costs could be roughly $800,000, but that he was willing to do it at greatly reduced cost, roughly 50%, thus that the number would be roughly $400,000. And so with that, I'm available for any questions from the board, and certainly happy to address any additional issues that I've not addressed.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions or discussion? Questions first for Mr. Reingold, or any discussion in general?
Just discussion, Madam Chair, if it's okay. So my thought process on this, and I'm obviously not an expert on the Supreme Court or anything like that, but my feelings from this, and looking back at the meeting back when we voted not to move forward, was that it didn't seem like a good idea to spend taxpayer dollars pursuing an appeal to the Supreme Court with a very, very high likelihood that they would not hear the case. And just my rough personal belief is that, one, I don't think the Supreme Court would take the case purely to just reaffirm two lower decisions. That with the two lower decisions, particularly one being a circuit court appeal, that the Supreme Court would said, hey, enough's been done and we won't hear the case. So my thought process is, if the Supreme Court does decide to take the case, then there must be something in that case record to make them think, oh, there has been something incorrect or inappropriate or whatnot, that there is a valid reason why we should hear this case. And to me, that kind of sways the needle a lot more towards to the county's side. So, and I want to thank the folks that are willing to raise the $200,000. In my mind, this makes this kind of a no-risk option for the county to at least see where they go with it. And again, I think if the Supreme Court, and again, I still think it's unlikely, but if the Supreme Court decides to hear the case, I really think that's a big shift in the playing field. So I would be supportive of going, what's been presented here, that I think if we do get to the Supreme Court, the $400,000 would be a very reasonable expenditure of taxpayer dollars, given the fact, again, I believe that the acceptance of the case is a big game changer from the county's point of view. So that's just kind of where I am on this, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Fletcher, or?
Commissioner Fletcher, you can go first.
Thank you. First and foremost is I want to say, Counselor, I believe you best advise us in looking at this rail going forward and the likelihood. I think we have to temper our expectations. It is a big hurdle to get to the Supreme Court, and I do recall that you clearly stated that our case has tremendous worthiness, but to get there, it's not likely. It's not likely. And they do have so many other issues. But one of the individuals who wants to set the stage and pony up and get those funds here said something to me on the break, and it really resonated. He said, you know, up the road, you all have fought hard. What would the grandchildren say if we left it at this? That meant a lot. And I'm very concerned that we've had to make that decision, but being a good steward of the taxpayer dollars, I believe the right decision was made at that last meeting. But this is very refreshing, very appreciative, and very supportable. So with that, I'll yield back.
You'll yield back. Okay. Other comments, Commissioner Solari?
It's always a very, very rare day when Commissioner O'Brien and I have the same rationale for two different issues, which I have to say then means we're probably on the right track. So with that said, I'd also like to I'd like to thank the people who have been responsible for actually having this before us today, but say that this is an astounding moment in American democracy. The idea that the people of the community have actually, on an issue of this great importance, come forward and done what is necessary to push us forward. I don't know or haven't heard of the same type of thing happening in any other community in America in the last 20 or 30 years. And I think that's astounding, and it's certainly another reason to be very, very proud to live in this community. I think it is not only at this point then the right thing to do, but I think it sends an incredible message to the death train and to all those people who thought that it was a done deal, which it has never been. This reconfirms that it's not a done deal. So with all that being said, Madam Chair, I'd be very, very happy to make the motion to go ahead with staff recommendation for this item.
I have a motion by Commissioner Solari with a second by Commissioner Flesher.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd just like to refute Commissioner Solari's statement. I don't think it's all that rare, Bob.
No, you agree with me often. You agree with me often. It's just
we
when I agree with you.
I would concede it's not common, but I don't think it's extremely rare. And we both agree that Jackie is the only reason we keep you around, so.
Well, that's
All
stating
right.
the obvious.
We do have a motion and a
Well-
second. Is there any
Madam Chair.
discussion? Yes, Commissioner Zork.
Thank you, the lonely one down here on the left. Thank you, and nice to see that the last vote was 4-1. I was the one not in favor of not going forward with reviewing our options that we may be on to a passage of this today. But I'd like to first especially thank those that are going to be writing these checks to come up with the $200,000 to make this possible. They are the ones that are making this happen today. So my thanks to all of you. I don't know who they all are, but if you could share that we are all very appreciative of them.
Watch this.
Commissioner, one moment, sir.
Oh, I'm
We're-
sorry, I thought he said to come up.
Not yet.
Don't go far. Don't go far. You know, we've invested many years and a considerable amount of dollars to get to where we were denied, but to now have the private sector come forward and carry us to the finish line to see, is there any, you know, can we be successful in this? And I've all along, it's sitting through Judge Cooper's court, and hearing all the different elements of this case from the beginning, that I think we have a very good case. Some people say, well, what about the bondholders? Well, I don't have any mercy for the bondholders. They knew this litigation was going on, and if the tax exempt status goes away, well, that's for them to figure out in another court. But again, thank you all for making this possible, and I will be supporting today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion from the commission? Seeing none, we will open it to public comment. Sir, did you have something you'd like? Please state your name and address for the record to begin.
Yes, my address is 101 Oyster Cut, Indian River Shores. My name is Jack Preschlack. I've been before you in the past, and I'd like to compliment you all for keeping an open mind, and particularly Dylan Reingold, because it wasn't easy for him to listen to all the appeals, and he, I think, kept the door open, and I think that's a great thing that you've done. We have the money in hand now, I think. We have $180,000 pledged. I have checks for much of that, and but we want to. I want to make one announcement. Commissioner Solari was going to put us over the top with a pledge. I don't think that will be necessary anymore, Bob.
Well, Jack, as I said, Jackie and I would be happy to honor that pledge if it got us over the top.
But there are people in this room who have opposed the train for so long, and I can't tell you how happy I am. The thing swung on a friend of mine in Illinois who was a retired circuit court judge, Michael Ludig. He was one step away from the Supreme Court under George W. Bush. He was the one who looked at the court records. He said, Jack, not only do you have a great case, but it's of national significance because of the encroachment issue. I'm not a lawyer, but don't misunderstand, but he said the court today is anxious to see a case where the administrative or executive branches overstep their bounds in interpreting the law. And in this case, it's very clear. Public-private activity bonds were never intended for high-speed rail. So I think we have an excellent chance. Now, there's no assurance that we're going to get there. But as Tim said, and as Mr. Fleischer said, you know, to see your grandchildren say, did you do everything you could to stop the train? You can't answer, no, I did 90%. You have to say, I did it all. And this is the 100% that's at stake. It's a private-public partnership, and I can't thank you enough for letting us do our share. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Thank
Jack,
you.
Jack.
If we could just keep the applause down so we can get through the meeting, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Jack,
Commissioner
I think
Bryan.
you all need to consider you might need a 10% contingency and raise 220, and that way Commissioner Solari will have an opportunity to participate.
Get in the game. Get in the game.
Well, thank you all.
All right. Any other comments from the public? I will remind you that we do have a motion by Commissioner Solari with a second by Commissioner Fleischer to move forward.
Make this, Joseph Pellin, President Black Swan, also a member of the advisory board of the RNA. I spoke in favor of this last time. Of course, we didn't have the support we do this time. So I'm in favor, of course, again. And plus that, with the private funds coming forward, it's a no-brainer. So I support you all, and I'll keep it short. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, Bob Allard, Vice Mayor of Indian River Shores. I worked in the bond market for a third of a century. I just want to address Commissioner Zork's point. It clearly states in the offering statement of the 2019 A bonds, and there's a similar clause in the other bonds. And this is on page 21 of the document. Event of taxability. The Series 2019 A bonds are subject to extraordinary mandatory redemption in whole in the event of determination of taxability on the early state for which the requisite notice of redemption can be given in the manner set forth below following the occurrence of such determination of taxability at a redemption price of par plus accrued interest to, but not including redemption date. The point is the bondholders are all on notice that these bonds can be taken away from them, and it's the responsibility of the issuer
to come up with the money to do it. It's a mandatory redemption. They're absolutely required to do that. And I just want to stay for, also for the record, I've heard a lot of comments from people I've talked to and allude a little bit to the press. The state of Florida can be in a hook in this. That is absolutely untrue. The bondholders knew when they came in, it was right on the front page of the prospectus. It states that it is not an obligation of the state of Florida or any of its bodies. So that should not come into play if the Supreme Court does take this case. They should be looking at other issues, but this is not, that's not one of them. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? See.
I'll talk fast. Susan Meal, 1370 St. Catherine's Circle. Thank you so much for being here today and taking this matter up. I brought with me, but I'm not going to spend any time on it, a letter written to Secretary Cho of the Department of Transportation back in 2018. It's signed by what were then 5 Congress people, including Congressman Ron DeSantis, who is now our governor. This outlined how the private activity bonds were not appropriately approved for the All Aboard Florida Brightline Virgin Trains project. We could get into the details of Title 23 funds, but this also mentions the fact that Brightline, when it applied for the bonds, said it received the Title 23 funds, and it didn't, which is the crux of the problem. Florida East Coast Rail did. And I would actually hazard a guess that with the expansion of these railroad tracks for this project, the money that went into improving those grade crossings is probably null and void now because they're going to rip them all up. So it adds insult to injury. But what I did want to say is that this letter is symbolic of what we've been through with this whole project from day one. And that is the bureaucrats and the administrative branch turning its back on the people of this county, of this region, of this state, and the country. Because one of the things that this letter says is that these congressmen were concerned because of the national ramifications of this decision and approval on the entire private activity bond project. So this commission, these congressmen, and others like Senator Mayfield are working diligently to try to overcome the fact that this bureaucratic level has turned its back on us. And we really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you, Madam, for allowing us to speak. My name is Len Susi. I'm coming from Martin County. We've been working on this problem for a long, long time. I represent the Guardians of Martin County. I represent the Citizens Against the Train. And your leadership in this county and this commission has been extraordinary. Commissioner Solari, in I believe it was 2014, came to us in Martin County and said, you don't understand the gravity of the issue before you. And he was speaking to Commissioner Haddock at that time, and we arranged that you would pass on a Tuesday your budget for $3 million. On the same day, we in Martin County passed the budget of $1.2 million. And that was initial funding to get this fight going. And I want to say thank you for your leadership then. Thank you for your leadership now. We have checks for Mr. Preslack from Martin County, and there's a lot more to come where that came from. And I wanted you to see the stay the course, and you're doing the right thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right.
Madam Chair, if I may, real quick. I think almost everybody here is for what we're doing here, but just in fairness, I want to report, I did get emails from Keith Kite and a Philip Wheeler or Weiler on the opposing view, just to put that out there.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Seeing none, we do have a motion by Commissioner Solari with a second by Commissioner Flesher. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And that with that, all right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to Commissioners' Matters. The next item under Commissioners' Matters is actually my matter.
What's the matter?
What is the matter? The matter is we have a census coming up, and we have done a lot of work and trying to keep.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Solari and a second by Commissioner
Especially
Fleischer.
since you have 3 less zeros in your
I
item.
know. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that.
For the record, Madam Chair, as you recall, 10 years ago, I had that obligation, and we had 0 funding.
Well, you know, the ladies like to
So-
shop, so
So
we're getting some banners.
we expect even a greater impact, although we were at the top of the edge of the 67 counties.
I will try to dazzle you with the count that we get.
Please do so.
Okay.
It means funding for this county. Thank you.
I'll at least justify the banners. All right, next item is Solid Waste Disposal District, award of bid 2020028, transportation of recyclables from Indian River County to St. Lucie.
Move
Welcome.
Madam Chair, move approval.
I have a motion by Commissioner Solari and a second by Commissioner O'Brien. Any questions, comments, or discussion?
I just would like to acknowledge that the former County Administrator Joe Baird is in the audience today, and he's been mentioned several times, so I figured just go ahead and point him out. Good to see you again, Joe.
Always a pleasure to have you with us, Joe.
Now, the important thing is Jackie's in the audience. I'd like to go have lunch with her, so can we move on, Madam Chair?
We do have a motion and a second.
Any other pointing
other
out in the
discussion?
audience?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Oh.
Next item is final payment to Mr. Mulch for yard waste processing
Move
service.
approval.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Zork and a second by Commissioner Solari. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we stand adjourned.